wonderful to see so many of you here on this lovely sunny evening.
So my name is Richard McCleary. I'm a senior lecturer in Islamic art at the University of York, and I'm going to be chairing this event this evening. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to these wonderful confines of the Merchant Adventurers Hall for the 4th annual Bruce Hornell Memorial Lecture. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and especially Sarah Mitchell and all the team at the Festival of Ideas for taking care of the seemingly endless logistics that such events require. In addition, were it not for all the generous donors who contributed to the fund that underpins this lecture series, it couldn't take place, so a big thank you to all of them. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 5.5 years since Bruce Hornell passed away here in York, and his loss is still deeply felt by many, including, I'm sure, some of you here today. Bruce was deeply passionate and extremely well informed about Persian painting and the arts of the book, and had a very keen eye. And he was also a great lover of Herat, so I'm sure he would approve of both the choice of speaker and the topic of tonight's lecture. I'm sure we're all in for a feast for the eyes and some delightful insights into the 2 manuscripts we're going to hear about this evening. It's my great pleasure and indeed an honour to introduce tonight's speaker, Barbara Brend. I first met Barbara 15 years ago at the launch event for her wonderful study of Mohammed Juki's Shahnameh, acquired by the Royal Asiatic Society, and I still treasure my signed copy of the book. Barbara's written extensively on a huge range of manuscripts and other aspects of Persian painting, but she's also written on various aspects of architecture, including a seminal article on 13th century monuments in Konya. Tonight she's going to be speaking about 2 manuscripts of Nizami's Khamsah, both from Herat. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'd just like to say I didn't know Bruce Hornell very well, but I had met him, and I was much aware of his great knowledge of Persian and Persian arts altogether. So I'm very glad to offer this in tribute this evening. So I'm going to talk about 2 manuscripts in the British Library. They are both copies of the Khamsah of Nizami. That's the Quintet, the 5 books of Nizami that he composed in the 12th century. But these copies are of the 15th, mostly, and that's the time when Herat, now Afghanistan, was under the rule of descendants of Timur, Tamerlane. It starts under one rule and it goes on under the other. So now I'm going into the first of these, additional 25900, which was acquired for the museum, the British Museum then, from the widow of James Ballantyne in either 1864 or 65. He'd been an educator in India, and that's how he'd acquired it, I suppose. So there is a bit of what's now a double page of illumination. Obviously, that's the right-hand page. There's a little more of the detail. You can probably see sort of some resemblance to what Lindisfarne does and quite a deal of difference as well, but it's kind of quite nice to see them at the same moment. That is the line giving our date, which in Islamic terms is 846, 1442. But that is only our first date because the manuscript has 5 books, Quintet, and the date is only on the end of the first one. So something then happens. There's an interruption, and most of the pictures are of the 1490s, not the 1440s. And then here is just a little bit of ornamentation, if I get the right press. Yeah, there we go. A little birdie thing beside a text column, and that's something that might be datable about the 1530s or so. So a lot of bits and pieces go on with the manuscripts over time. Now, press hard. There we go. Double frontispiece we have. So on the right-hand side, you can perhaps make out a prince and a lady entertained with singers and wine and general niceness in a garden. And on the other side, a courtyard where food is being prepared, presumably one would think to feed this princely couple. However, something has been bodged together here, possibly just at the time of the Ballantine purchase, because these are not a true double frontispiece. If you look at them, the sky is different. On the right, we're in the night because you can see stars, and on the left, we're golden, so that's day. So we've got a disjunction in time anyway. And furthermore, on the right, there is a nibble in the upper right, a little funny bit of gold. That is where text has been cut out. The picture has been lifted out of the middle of the manuscript and used as a frontispiece. So, you know, already a bit of bodging's gone on, but we don't really know when. Now, here we see the prince and the princess in detail. He is Prince Khosrow of Iran, and he has here got together with Princess Shireen of Armenia, and they are falling in love. And we have a particular style of painting, which I think I can tie it to a particular artist. You may feel there's a certain fragility in these figures, a certain sort of stiffness and tension. You can see at any rate she has a very long, elegant hand. They have slightly, well, anyway, they look tense and clenched to me. Now, here we have a picture which I think is by the same artist. Our right-hand picture shows a moment when they have had something of a quarrel. She has gone off to seclude herself in a castle. He goes pretending he's hunting, but is in fact looking for her. He gets to the castle and does quite a lot of asking whether he can come in, and she is up the top saying no. Now, the bit on the left is a segment from the cresting that runs around the top left of the right-hand picture, but I've tipped it on its side a bit, and that contains the date for this picture, which gives us 895 or 1490. So it's sort of quite a thing to have the date for a manuscript in your picture. It's an indication of status. And I think this means that the painter is someone by the name of Shah Muzaffar, who was at this point the son of the current head of the library come book production outfit, the Kitab Khane, which is something that a self-respecting prince owns. Well, I suppose he owns it. The financial detail I'm not quite sure of, but anyway, he has a workshop and library, and I think that this picture is by the same person as the previous one, and we are now at 1490 into the realm of a prince, into the period of a prince called Husayn Baikara. Now, I think I can, there we go. These are the ladies in that upper window, and I'm actually a little confused as to which one of them is Shireen saying, "You're not to come in," and which are her maidens, possibly saying, "Oh, I wish he could come in," or restraining her. Quite possibly, Shireen is the one standing in blue and yellow, but the one in green is looking a bit lovesick as well. So you can't always be quite sure what you're reading. Anyway, down the bottom, we have the prince on his horse looking up. And we'll see him again later. Here we have another of the stories of the quintet. This story is set in Arabia, and it's the story of lovers who, well, children who fall in love at school, but they're from different tribes, they're not allowed to marry, so a great deal of sighing and anguish goes on. And the young man, originally called Qais, is called later Majnoon, meaning someone who has been driven mad by love. So when he's been driven mad, his father takes him to the Kaaba, you know, the central monument of Islam, in the hope that that's going to cure him. So that's what's going on here. But the young man clutches at the ring of the Kaaba door and says that, you know, he hopes he will continue in his love. Now, I think this is by the same painter. We have the same slight tension, I feel. We have the same long-wristed hands. We also have a bit of repainting in the left-hand picture. The second man in from the left with the bald head, possibly, he's been repainted a bit in India, so everything travels. But the basis is, I think, here of the 1490s, and it's a wonderful bit of architecture, the bit that you almost don't notice at first, up on the right-hand side, where it takes you through arches and arcades towards a depiction of Mecca as it might be imagined. Here we have a picture of another of the stories in this manuscript, and this picture has an attribution which is written vertically between the pairs of columns below the picture. So probably you can only see a sort of slight smudge in the middle between the two pairs at the bottom, but it's telling us that it is the work of Bihzad, and he is the most famous of the Persian painters of this period. So what's going on here is that a person who's basically historical, of the Husainian dynasty, called Bahram, who's mad about hunting, and he has gone hunting and he has pursued a female onager. And she doesn't seem to be sort of running away all that hard. So he follows her, and then he finds that she leads him to the lair of a dragon. So instead of slaying an onager, he slays a dragon and cuts it open and finds inside the foal of the onager, and then he understands why it is he's been brought there. So there's a very fine dragon slithering down the right-hand side, and I think it's rather sort of clever the way you're given to understand there's a great deal more dragon inside the cave than you actually see. You know, there's twirls more to come. Now, that is our Bihzad on the left, and we will agree, we will accept the note saying it's he. And I don't think it is by the same painter as our Prince Khosrow on the right. Obviously different story, but I think one feels in the Bihzad a sort of vigor and enterprise and so on. And I think one feels in the Khosrow on the right this sense of fragility that I mentioned. And the fragility is reasonably a feature of the painter I'm trying to pin this on, because he does die at 24. Here is another picture where there isn't the formal attribution to Bihzad, but there's a scribbly one at the bottom. And what we have here is a merchant who has gone in pursuit of gain and sort of rather overdone it in pursuit of gain. And he is riding in the desert when suddenly his horse springs dragon heads. And at the same time, he is confronted by demons. So he's obviously doing something a bit wrong. I think it's a lovely picture. I think one again feels the sort of vigor of Bihzad, and you also feel a great deal of humour. I think if you look at the detail, you can see that he's clinging on with his knees and legs, which are slightly clamped to the side of his mount by that big wing. He's got a nasty array of dragon's heads coming at him, which, not surprisingly, he's slightly leaning back from. But the painter's got a very practical, physical sense, because he leans his hand on the rump of the horse, which is what you would do if you were, taken aback in that manner. And then there's a rather nice funny at the end, which is that the horse's tail has turned into a serpent, which is slightly pointed up by curling into the margin so that you don't miss it, and coming back potentially to bite him. So there's a lot going on in the picture. The form of demon relates to this type of demon, which we know from albums of pictures, for the most part in Topkapi in Istanbul. These are pictures undated. I put them in the 1330s, but not everybody agrees with that. And they're of unknown provenance. I mean, one says, obviously looks a bit Central Asian, but, that's a bit vague. So there's a tradition of doing these sort of grim figures, dark-skinned. They tend to wear little sort of loincloths. They often have an amount of jewellery on, which probably relates them to sort of Buddhist prototypes, something like that. They have horns and fangs and all that sort of thing. But when you look at those in our picture, they are obviously of this type of demon. That the big one is sort of the type of model that the painter's using. But he's actually made it a bit funny, because they're not only terrifying, some of the ones at the bottom are being slightly incommoded by having baby demons with them. And up at the top, upper right, you may be able to make out a palish female demon who is riding on what presumably is her partner and directing him. So he's a bit encumbered as well. So you've got this sort of jokey thing going on as well as everything else. And probably you can't see it very well, but over the horizon there are a few more demons who look exactly like the sort of sports pundits giving a commentary. Now, here is another picture which we attribute to Bihzad. Same manuscript, we're still in additional 25900. Here we have a small story in the first book of the five, in which the Turkish ruler, is riding about in the country, and a woman comes and says, "You are making such a mess of this country, and you're not controlling your men, and it's all horrible, and somebody's accused me of murder or sheltering a murderer, and it's really very nasty, and what are you going to do about it?" So there she is, pleading. The ruler is riding along. He's preceded by a black running footman. He doesn't have to be black, but he does, a footman of this nature does run before an important rider to clear the way. And eventually we think that the figure of the king is there making a bit of a reference to the current ruler, Husayn Baykara, because he looks a bit like him, and he also is depicted wearing green. Now, you've seen that picture. Here is a picture of another story, another manuscript altogether. This is a manuscript, again, British Library, of 1397. So much earlier, practically a century earlier, but I think Bihzad has been able to see this manuscript in the Royal Library. I think he's picked up ideas from this picture to use in his picture. One of the obvious things is baggage over the horizon. Then the idea of the central area with a mule in it. The gent in green and mauve is coming on a mule. It's got much bigger ears than a horse. And then down the bottom, the main weight of the picture is in the foreground with a little tent. Here we've got, on the other page, Bihzad's page, we have a cluster of horsemen. And we have on the right a man who is digging water, taking water out of a pond with a flask. And I think that's been moved up to the middle area of the left-hand picture, Bihzad's picture. It's not required by any manner of means in the story. I think he's taken these images and used it. This is obviously speculative. One is not going to turn up a note saying, and actually I borrowed it from that. It's just how I think manuscripts were used in the Kitab-Khani. And then here is one when we are out of Herat in Afghanistan and over to Tabriz in the Sasanian picture, and we have Alexander the Great, Iskandar, who is visiting a holy man, and that, I think, is by a painter called Mirza Ali, who will later paint this picture in the great Shahnameh of the 1430s. Right, now if we look at the other manuscript, that starts off with a frontispiece, which is all of a piece, no problems about it having put together, considerable problems about whom it's showing. So we have on the right tentage, the main gentleman in a sort of buff colour, sitting cross-legged, and on the left-hand page we have the entourage waiting around, food, drink coming in, horse ready in case he wants to go somewhere. And the gentleman is being shown a note, and it's got teeny-weeny writing on it, and I can't decipher it, but people have looked at it. And in consequence, some people think that this is a nobleman of Herat. It's not the prince himself. It's not Husayn Bakara himself. I think it's not a nobleman of Herat. I don't think such a great manuscript would have been made for an individual courtier. I think it's something devised as a diplomatic gift, because it's made just about at the time when Husayn Bakara, located in Herat, is going to make a bid to reconquer the ancestral capital of Samarkand, though he's not going to make it. Anyway, be that as it may, this picture has a note on it saying that it is made by a painter called Mirak, who is at this point the boss of the Kitab-Khani, the library cum workshop. Ah, yes, here is our picture, and I think it's been deliberately made so that the gentleman apparently being honoured in that frontispiece is kept to a reasonable degree of humility. He's sitting in cross-legged in an old-fashioned pose. He's in a fairly dim colour. He doesn't look very resplendent. Does have a little moustache, which appears to be characteristic of paintings by Mirak. Here we are back into another of the 5 stories, the one about the Prince of Iran and the Princess of Armenia, Shireen. She has here been playing with her ladies in the mountains, which is what she likes doing. And then she has a bit of a rest, and someone brings to her a picture of a prince, which has been hung on a tree by a follower of Prince Khosrow to catch her attention. So 3 shots at it and they really get her attention. But it's a lovely picture of the lady in a sort of very reposeful situation. If you could see the faces, which I guess you probably can't, they are slightly square-jawed, which is one of the things I think is characteristic of the painter Mirac, but more characteristic is the fact that here is a dandelion, and here is a dandelion from the frontispiece, and it is rather rare. I don't know of other pictures of dandelions in this area of literature, so I think it's almost like a sort of token that he painted that. Here we have, wait a minute, we can get them both now. Here we have on the left hand the picture you've seen already, Sultan Sanjar and the old woman telling him what a dreadful state the country's in. And here on the right hand, we have it with an attribution scribbled underneath to Mirac, which makes sense. One feels, even without being, terribly familiar with these pictures, I think one can see that the right-hand picture is more old-fashioned. It's sort of more stodgy, in a way. I mean, it's perfectly explanatory. It shows you what's happening. It doesn't have all the extra stuff that Bihzad has put in, with the man taking water out of the pool and having ridden on a mule and the background and everything. So that's a measure. Bihzad at this point will be a relatively young man in the, well, not young, sort of middle-aged actually, probably, in the Kitab Hani, which for a while is under Mirac. Now, here are 2 pictures, I think. These are usually attributed to Bihzad. This picture shows us a scene in a Turkish bath, obviously. It's beautifully compartmentalized. So on the left, you have the caliph who is being bathed and bathed, and the keeper of the Turkish bath offers him his daughter in marriage. And the point of the story is, how does he dare to offer this to the caliph? And he dares to it because he has his feet on a hoard of gold. So it's a little story about the power of money. But Bihzad makes it this fantastically marvelous picture in which you have space, you have character, you have again a bit of humor. In the foreground, the people who are trying with decent modesty to take their clothes on and off. And you have the wonderful display of tile dados matching coloured tiles in blue. You may be able to distinguish there's a rod running right across to lift a towel off the rack, off the string, wire, whatever it's on, which sort of helps to delineate the space. So you've got sort of morality, story, humour, space, colour, everything piled in together. Oh, and the other thing I was just going to say is, yes, look back at the bit where on the left, in the right-hand picture, on the left, there are some little streaks of dirt, of soot, running off from lamps on either side of that sort of greyish patch you can see. And you've got exactly the same on one of the pillars down below in the crypt here, the same sort of little run of singe up one of the wooden columns here. There it'll just be soot. I just thought it was a nice thing for this gathering. we have also this splendid picture of the building of a palace for Bahram Gur, that's the hunter bloke. And it's got wonderful scaffolding held together with bits of rope in the way that one can still see in some countries of the East. It has people doing all their sort of trades and crafts and things, bringing in bricks, chipping bricks to size. In the bottom right, bottom left, you have a wonderful picture of people sort of shoveling mortar. And I think that grey mortar without an outline round it gives you an extreme impression of what it's sort of like physically, because everything else is clearly delineated into shapes and colours, but the mortar is hazy at the edges. Then I have another little bee in the bonnet about this picture, which is, I think it's quite likely that Bihzad had seen a Western picture of a crucifixion. You have 3 main uprights with cross pieces tied on, which you may or may not think sufficient justification. But the thing that gets me is on the right-hand side of that picture, you have a gentleman in blue up a ladder, and he's going up a ladder face outwards. And to my mind, nobody, especially when they're building a building, goes up a ladder face outwards. But in pictures of the deposition, the taking down of Christ from the cross, you do have figures on ladders facing outwards. Anyway, this is, theory. I might be quite wrong, but that's my offering. Here we have a fine picture of mourning, again probably attributed to Bihzad. This is mourning for the, remember there were these 2 children of different Arab tribes. The female child has been married off, but then her husband has died, so we're doing a bit of mourning for him. Again, clearly articulated where you are supposed to look by colour, and that picture in a way seems to live from this picture slightly earlier, 5 years earlier. This is a 1485 picture, and I think probably Bihzad, he's working the same idea. He's again got prominent blues. He has the wall which separates off the men outside on their carpet, women inside, and I think here he has reprised the idea that he gives you in that poplar tree that shoots off into the top right by the gentleman who is lamenting on the roof. Here we have a death scene, again attributable to Bihzad, I think. This is one of the most profound pictures, I think, in the manuscript. The Princess Shireen, the Armenian, had, in one of the moments when she has moments with stress with Khosrow, another lover has offered himself to her, a sculptor called Farhad, only she won't have anything to do with him. And at such and such a moment, he despairs and throws himself down some rocks and dies when he's been given false news of her death. So then we look at the faces here, if we get them. There we have the head of Farhad, whose only problem was that he loved where he couldn't. And he has a sort of noble look in death, a look of noble repose. And there in the brown jacket, we have the man who's brought the false news of the death. And you feel he's sort of stricken by remorse. He's biting the finger, sometimes of surprise, but I think here of, surprise that Farhad would do this. But I think he represents a sort of challenge to the viewer to say, what would you have done in the circumstances? So I think with all the other things that Bihzad gives us, he gives us a moral challenge sometimes. Now, here we have on the left the picture you've seen before, Bihzad's picture of the dragon, the onager and the dragon. And on the right, we have a picture in the second manuscript in which we see quite clearly what's going on, but it doesn't quite have the vigor of the Bihzad picture. And I think that that is by somebody called Qasim Ali, who is a pupil of Bihzad. Here is another, which I think is by him. Here, the traveller has, he's been asleep, and while he was asleep, his companion has fallen into a hole. But that one and that one, I think, are by Qasim Ali. On the right-hand side, we have Layla and Majnun, the Arab children at school, where they are falling in love. So this is a school scene in a mosque or a madrasa. So we have the architecture setting the scene, we have the teacher, we have the girl picked out by her warm orange-red colour under the arch, and presumably the boy falling in love with her is to the right of the picture. Now, here, Majnun has been pining for Layla, and she has died and been buried, buried. And he has come to her tomb and has thrown himself upon it to die. So that is all in the lower half of the picture. There is a stream which would have been silver, but is somewhat oxidized. So a lot of the rivers in these pictures we have to read as having once been more silver than they are now. But because it's a river in this desert area, herbage and flowers have grown round it. So there's a sort of statement in that part of the picture that though he has died for love, their love was a great thing. It was a wonderful thing, and indeed they will be united in death. On the upper part, we have ordinary life proceeding as it did before, and on that, on the skyline, we have a chap with a pipe, and just above his head, we have a note saying that this is the work of a painter, the painter Qasim Ali. That's the one who's the student, the pupil of Bihzad. So we can, if we like, believe in that that note of attribution. And in fact, I think we do believe in it. Here is yet another story. As a young man who has a garden, he goes off and does some sort of business. He comes back and is escorted to an upper room that overlooks his garden, And there he sees there are a whole load of ladies disporting themselves in a pool, and so on. Anyway, the young man is in the window that you can see is slightly orange in the right-hand picture, and you can see in the left-hand detail that he's peering out from between two shutters. So that's quite nice for pictures, and it's rather nice his fingers are just sort of sneaking round so that you can see he's there. But then what is also interesting is that if you turn on its side the little bit that's above his white turban, it gives you the name of Qasim Ali. So I think this one really has to be believed as a signature. I think he sneaked it in so that it looks like a bit of ornamental work. I think he's probably feeling that he's not getting enough recognition. I think they must all be probably competing to some degree for recognition when they do this work. So signatures or attributions are important. It's just we can't always believe them. But I think we can believe this one because it's so cunningly placed. Here we have the picture from this, the second manuscript. I should have said its name, I should have said its number before, Oriental 6810. Here is the scene where Alexander, Iskandar, goes to consult the holy man about how he's going to deal with a rather well-garrisoned fortress that he wants to take. And in fact, the holy man's just going to give a puff of wind and it is going to all break down. So that is an important and splendid picture. And there is Iskandar, Alexander, as we see him. And when drawn like this, we think that the painter is making a reference to the current ruler. I haven't bothered to put in for you a picture of the current ruler that we have, but it looks pretty much like that. And that sort of green is the favored color. And here is the picture, again, of Alexander supported by 7 philosophers. So this is the court of Alexander, and this picture provides us with the date, which is going to give us 1495. So this again is the date picture, which presumably is rather important, and it's the king in his court picture. And he looks like that. So it's very much the same sort of image as we've just seen, but then I would compare, if I get it right, boom. There we have the 2 Alexanders, the one on the right from the court scene, the one on the left from the consulting the sage scene. And my contention is they're not by the same person. I think that the one on the right is by Bihzad. It has a certain weight. He's got a little bit more girth round the front. He's a little bit slumped even, whereas the one on the left is sort of sprightly and in good nick. So it's more according to the ideal image pattern, and it's not got the same realism and feeling for the human body. So I think that one is by Bihzad's student, Qasim Ali. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Oh.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. A wonderful insight into those two manuscripts, really close reading, but also giving the context and then some wonderful jewel-like details. So hopefully you will indulge us and answer any questions that we have. Yes, let me see if I can get this out without breaking anything. Okie doke. No, he's going to beat me to it. Okay, perfect. This gentleman here first, please. Here, I'll do that if you want to see.
I can probably do it. Okay.
Thank you very much. The question in two parts really, about text. Would we think of this as a standard text, or these are standard texts?
Yeah.
The second part was, are we looking at something where the story is primarily told by the pictures with very little bits of text, or have we got like an illustrated book, pages and pages of writing plus a few illustrations?
That's a very good question. Absolutely spot on. And these are classic works. Everybody educated knows the story. Those who maybe just heard it sung probably know it off by heart, but readers will know it anyway. So we have quite a lot of text in 4 columns in between the pictures. And the pictures, I think one supposes that the patron or the patron in cahoots with the librarian decides what's going to be painted and why. So it's partly a matter of going to the patron's favourite bit, or anything that might be related to the patron's status or family, or wouldn't you like a picture of that? So up to a point you can judge something of the patronage by which scenes are illustrated. I mean, there is overall a scheme of things that are illustrated, and there are incidents in the stories that either are very rarely illustrated or aren't illustrated. But yes, there is acres of text between these pictures. Is that what you need?
Very good answer. Clarify.
Yes, there's one here and then there, please.
I have a sort of amusing question, which is, how do you spell Bihzad?
Bihzad, B-I-H-Z-A-D.
Thank you.
It's the thing about the
I'm now curious if you want to go look up more, so.
B-I-Z-A-D will do it.
Yes, lady there and then...
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. All of those pictures take me back home. I'm from Iran. And I've seen so many of these images and pictures in the museums back home. I've got one question about Kamaluddin Bihzad. Why he didn't put any signature in the bottom of those paintings? Why? When we see his Asam Ali, he put his name in all of the pictures that you showed us. What was the reason?
Well, one doesn't know. I mean, it's all guesswork, really. There are little writings saying Bihzad below some of the pictures, but some of them are quite scribbly, and they don't look genuine. It seems that in the first one, maybe he's just sort of gaining status in additional 25900, and you can't tell if somebody permits the attribution to be put there or not. Probably when we get to Oriental 6810, the second manuscript, probably everybody knows it's Bihzad, and he's sort of in charge, and we don't need to worry about that. But we don't know. It's all guesswork.
Okay, thank you. Am I allowed to ask another question?
Sure.
Yes. About that picture, that you said that you thought that maybe Bihzad had seen a picture of crucifixion.
Yeah.
Something. What's the chance of that? Because Bihzad was born in Timurid, and at that time there was not much construction.
No, I know. It's very speculative, but there is also a theme of persons holding flowers. And in some earlier moment on some other topic, I had speculated that the idea of doing something like a portrait of somebody holding a bunch of flowers might have a Western touch in it. So it's possible. And also, once when I was showing some people run in the British Library, somebody said, "Oh, that looks like a crucifixion." And it was something I'd already thought. So I'm not the only person who's thought this. It may be mistaken, but it's my suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Good, the lady here.
Well, I just want to know, were most of those pictures from Herat?
Yes.
Were there any from Tabriz?
No, I only showed one from Tabriz on the end of the second picture. The big picture of people camping out with the moon and clouds and whatnot. And I didn't say much about it, I'm afraid, so you wouldn't probably have clocked it very well.
Right, okay. And just about the books, were they divided up, or are there complete copies of them? Like
No, they come in manuscripts with the 5 together, usually. So one refers to them.
complete now? No, they're all complete books, texts now, are they?
Well, these are manuscripts, there are loads and loads of manuscripts of the 5 stories of Nizami. Normally the 5 altogether. Normally they're done all together, but there are 1 or 2 where maybe some have got lost or fallen off, or somebody didn't want them or something. So they occasionally come up in 2s and 3s, but the normal thing is you get them 5 together as a set.
Oh, I thought that some texts
Kit.
had been sort of separated, sold off, separate pictures have been...
That can happen to any manuscript, but fortunately it hasn't happened to these ones, which are sitting happily in the British Library.
Yes,
thank you for your lecture. It was fascinating. You referred to manuscripts in the British Library, and I have a question about a manuscript that may be contemporary with one of them, and that is a 1532 manuscript of the illustrated Masnavi, which is markedly different from the Konya manuscript, for example, in the Mevlana Muzesi, that is only illuminated with unwan. It's not got any illustrations in it, whereas the 1532 manuscript of the Masnavi is fully illustrated. In fact, it has some very obscene images in that manuscript. You probably know the manuscript.
No, I'm afraid I don't know those very well.
It's an additional manuscript, it's an ADD.
Yes.
But the contrast between the 1278 manuscript of the one that's on display in the Mevlana Museum of the Masnavi is markedly aniconic, whereas it's dated as 1532 and dated from Tabriz, is fully and graphically illustrated. And there seems to have been a complete sea change in the style of illuminating and illustrating what is obviously regarded as a sacred text, rather than, I don't know, the Nizami's Khamsah is regarded as a secular text?
Well, I'm not sure how steep a distinction is made between sacred and secular, but it is literary narrative, as opposed to something which is principally a teaching volume.
A didactic book.
Yes. But I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything in detail about the manuscripts you're mentioning.
Thank you.
the person with the wonderful scarf there.
Thank you. What kind of interpretation of Iskandar is being put forward by the manuscripts, and how typical of the tradition is this?
Of Iskandar?
Yeah.
Well, he's a good thing. He is, in the Persian tradition, I think, he's at least half Persian. So the fact that he conquers Persia is all right. He's coming to claim his own.
Not always. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I have to disagree.
Sometimes I know the interpretation is a lot more negative in the Persian version of events regarding Iskandar. So I was just wondering.
Well, it may be so, but the pictures are definitely pro him.
So this one is a different interpretation, perhaps.
Well, it could be, but it's probably to do with the purpose of the manuscript,
So he's more, he's meant
which
to
is
be-
for saying hurrah for Sultan Husayn.
So he's more being evoked as sort of a model of a good model?
Yes, so yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
We've got time for one or two more questions, if there's any other takers. Did we miss anyone out? Well, if not, please do join me in thanking Barbara again for a wonderful and enriching talk.